Duffet he's given his time to help you. So please feel free, ask your questions. Professor Duffet, I will watch the chat. I will also watch the hands because I know you might not be able to see them. And do you mind if I then just interject at any point,
Please go ahead because I
Prof?
definitely can't see the hands when I share my screen. So
Mm,
please go ahead. I have started recording for everyone's benefit so that
thanks, Prof.
they can have access to this video, and I've got a backup recording as well. So yeah, you can make that available in the backup recording as well. I will also send you the material. Maybe I'll just put up the backup recording on YouTube, then they can, access it whenever they want to as well. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining. I just felt that after moderating your second assignment, that it was very important that I had another session with you, because as in my last session, there is a disconnect between your title, your research questions, and your conceptual frameworks, which without your study is nothing. So there wasn't a single student actually whose conceptual framework or model I was happy with. And if that is the case, and uh, you're going to use these concept papers as the basis for your masters, which means that there would not be a single student out of 45 students who I would currently, as it now stands, be interested in supervising. And that is not good because I'm the one that generally takes the most students to supervise. And if I'm not going to look at you, then obviously I'm going to be more interested in the past years where they had a better understanding of the very basics. So I thought if I could get you to understand how the conceptual framework linked to everything else, then when you do I believe you're doing a makeup assessment, your questionnaire, you would actually be able to design a good questionnaire, which, is based on your conceptual framework, and the conceptual framework is based on your titles and your research questions and your theoretical models. So I thought I'd just run a session where I would mainly focus on just showing you examples of how everything tied together, and the importance then of be able to design a research instrument, a questionnaire, or interview guide that would then allow you to um, create, or not create, but provide the data to bring your conceptual framework to life, which would then answer your research questions, which are based on your title. So let's move ahead, and Dr. Williams, I will just ask you if I'm going to be jumping between a Word document and a PowerPoint. And I say after this class, I'll upload the video on YouTube, and then I will send you this example to you, and I will include the YouTube link in here as well once I've uploaded it, so that the students have access to this at their discretion. Can you see on the screen the PowerPoint which says conceptual frameworks?
Indeed, Prof.
You can. Thank you very much. So, so I've taken pieces of the previous presentation, the research topic and research proposal, which I did with you earlier in the year. And then I just wanted to take you through 5 examples, and I've left a little bit of the theory just to show you in terms of your titles, which are starting to get a bit better, but most of them are still lacking elements. So the elements of a title, it should include something to do with your theoretical model or framework. So in this example, the perceived benefits, or should I say not benefits, but maybe let me just say the perceived risk model, but we looked at it from a positive point of view. So let me just do it that way. and make it full screen again. So it's a perceived risk model, but we looked at it from not a risk, but from a benefits point of view. And technological acceptance is this example one. That's what the research was based on. So you see, even if you don't have these elements in place, you cannot actually come up with a title. The broad theme of this example one is artificial intelligence in marketing. The specific artificial intelligence or topics that they're looking at is AI, chatbots, and virtual assistants used in marketing communication. There is no specific industry in this research because they will cut across various industries, and you'll see that in the questionnaire, and I'll give you a reason for this when I get to the questionnaire. So even from the title, you should already be able to visualize your research to your research instrument. It should translate into it. You need to be able to see all your components at once. And this is why I'm afraid all of your research there is disconnects. You cannot visualize your research from the title to the questions, to the conceptual framework, to the theoretical models, to your questionnaire. You need to have all of those components talking to each other. So anyway, various industries. The target group in this instance could be Gen Z, Y, and X. And again, I'm just going to escape and take out this because this was from the other example that I showed you. And so the target group for this will be Gen Z and Generation Y. And the location could be in Cape Town or South Africa, but we'll just say in this instance, let's just say South Africa. And this, the reason I've got both is you'll see in the questionnaire that I will talk more about this location because sometimes in your title you may say in Cape Town, but then you use a snowballing approach and you find that you've got participants from throughout South Africa, in which case you can increase your context or location. So these are the 5 components of the title, or 6 components of the title. So if you know all of these elements, and the dependent variable of these elements, by the way, of the perceived risk and technological acceptance model is purchase intention or intention to purchase. In other words, that's the last area in your conceptual model. So instead of including these models in your title, you could include the dependent variable, and you'll see that in the conceptual framework. So again, if you don't have your conceptual framework complete when you're doing your title, you actually can't finalize your title. So the example, and this is an actual student's title, one of my master students, is the influence of chatbot and virtual assistant marketing communication on intention to purchase among generation Z and Y in South Africa. So you can see it's got intention to purchase comes from the models. Chatbots and virtual assistants include the broad theme and the specific theme. There's no sectors, as you'll see in the questionnaire. The units of analysis are Gen Z and Y, but it could be small businesses, it could be whoever the target group, and the location. So where is it? Cape Town? Is it South Africa? Is it the Western Cape, Eastern Cape, where it is? So there's a lot that actually goes into this title. And obviously, all of this title, as I showed you previously, needs to be based on research gaps. So we're not going to the background of the research problem and the problem statement. I spoke about this last week, and if I looked at your second project, there wasn't one of your background to research problem or problem statements I was happy with because you did not consult enough sources. So, you know, those students I had last year know the format that I've used, and I showed all of you the format that you should use this year, and none of you really have done so. So there was not much improvement between your first and second project. So whether your research is necessary or not, you have not shown it via the research gaps in your background to the research problem. So that also needs a lot of work, but that's not the point of this. So once you have your title, well, you're kind of working on your title with everything else. I just wanted to show you the aims and objectives of the study. So therefore the aim of this study, and you'll see how this all is going to tie into your theoretical models and conceptual frameworks. So the aim of the study is to consider various cohorts' attitudes, in this case, you know, Gen Z and Y, but you can go broader here to AI chatbots and virtual assistants used in marketing communication. The attitudes that you're going to measure are financial, social, performance, product security and privacy and time benefits, perceived usefulness, perceived ease of use, customer engagement, attitudes, and intention to purchase. So at this stage in your aim, you need to know the constructs, or if you're doing qualitative research, you need to have a very good idea of the different themes that could emerge from your research because you've read widely. Then you come up with your primary research objective to ascertain the perceived attitudinal influence. So it's a bit broader than your secondary objectives of AI chatbots and virtual assistants used in marketing communication amongst Carlton and Cape Town. So it's a reformulation of your title, except you've gone broader. You haven't focused just on one attitude. Then you get to your secondary objectives, and these three secondary objectives must answer your primary research objective. So to examine Gen Y and Z's intention to purchase due to AI and chatbots and virtual assistants. So now we've looked at the specific attitude, the dependent variable, which I will show you what it is in the conceptual framework. So you can see, just referring to the conceptual framework, without having a clear idea of what your conceptual framework looks like, your title, your research questions, and everything else is going to be a mess, which was the case of most of your work, unfortunately, because your conceptual framework wasn't clearly articulated. So you want to examine that. You want to establish the usage factors that have an influence on intention to purchase, and what demographic factors have an influence on intention to purchase. So these two are cross-tabulation variables. Go ahead.
If I might just come in here, and please stop me if I'm wrong. I get the idea, and students can also say to me I'm wrong, but I get the idea that our students are not connecting the marketing principles, their knowledge of marketing, their knowledge of what does it mean when you say intention to purchase, to the different parts of the research proposal. Like, for example, the research objective. So if you say the intention to purchase, what does that entail? And therefore, I think that would guide you as to what your secondary objectives might be.
Yeah, I think, Dr. Williams, we will get deeper into that when we get to the actual questionnaire. So I will
but what
then,
I'm just saying, I'm just thinking that they're not making those connections.
Yeah, these constructs, intention to purchase, all of these, the different financial, social performance, risks or benefits, perceived ease of use, they all stem from these theoretical models or frameworks, and many are marketing related frameworks. So yes, I think we will delve into that just a little bit deeper as we progress, but I hear exactly what you're saying. Okay, so so you can see everything connects. So this, again, all of these components are related to your title, they're related to the theoretical model you've chosen and your conceptual framework. And then to answer these questions, you will need to kind of create the questionnaire or research instrument to answer these questions. And I'm going to show you that in more detail. And I'm going quite slowly with the first example, but then the other examples, I will, just repeat the principle 5 times over so that by the end you can kind of hopefully connect all the dots. Then you would translate your research objectives to the research question. So this exact objective, to ascertain the perceived attitude or influence, you would convert to a question, and these 3 objectives you would convert to questions. So you would say, what is the perceived attitude or influence of chatbots? How do different Gen Z and Y intention to purchase differ? What usage factors, what demographic factors? So instead of having 2 ascertain, 2 determine, 2 establish, 2 explore, you've just converted it to questions. So in the other examples, I'm just going to give you the objectives, but you need to convert them to questions. Okay. All of what I'm showing you've seen before. Then you would also have hypotheses. And these, although in this presentation and in your proposal, they come before the conceptual framework, are directly translated from your conceptual framework. And I'll tell you what the difference between a framework and a model is also just now. There is a slight difference. So here we're saying financial benefits positively affect Gen Z and Y's usage attitudes towards CB and VA, chatbots and virtual assistants. Financial benefits, yeah, I just want to check something. Why have I got usage? I think this, I'm just going to delete that. Yeah, attitudes, because that is a construct. Financial benefits and positively reflect Gen Z and Y's purchase intention due to chatbot. So you can just see that we're looking at relations, regression lines, attitudes towards CB and VAs mediate the positive effect between financial benefits and purchase intention. We're going to see what these mean in a moment. Social benefits have a positive influence on Gen Z and Y's. And again, I'm just going to take out that word usage. Panel beating this presentation as I go along. Towards purchase intention, social benefits have a positive influence on purchase intention. And we're also going to just do one more, take out this usage. There we go. Remember to save this. Let's just do a quick save. Don't want to lose these errors, corrections. And then performance benefits have a positive influence on purchase intentions. I've just given a couple of hypotheses, but there's actually many, many more. Very few of you had any hypothesis in your project 1 or 2, because I don't think you understand really how they connect and what they are. Yet most of you were doing quantitative research, so most of you should have had hypothesis. But because your conceptual models and frameworks were non-existent or a mess, you can't see this. So those are the hypotheses, just some hypotheses. We're going to come back to all of this once we get to the conceptual framework. So just to recap, it's very important that there's full alignment between the title, the introduction to the introduction or background to research problem, where you're showing the gaps, your actual problem statements. We covered these 2 points last time. I'm not covering them again. The title must link to objectives, the questions, the hypothesis, and then your theoretical and conceptual frameworks refer to the illustrative example in the previous slides. And now we're going to come to these 2 points, and this is the whole point of the presentation. So we mentioned that there were 2 theoretical frameworks that we use. Now, a framework would be this diagram is a model, technological acceptance model, but the framework is the broader, it's the explanation, it's the whole theory discussed would be the framework. But when you just give this diagram, it's a model. Okay, so that's the difference. A framework is broader, it's the discussion behind the model, whereas the model is actually just the little figure. And that's the same for your conceptual framework, is your full discussion behind all the different variables that are included in your model. But yeah, so there's 2 models that we have used, or frameworks that we have used. We've used the TAM model, and we've used the perceived risk model, or let's just say again, it's risks, but we've converted them in this research to benefits. So instead of stating them negatively, we have used them, we've phrased the statements positively, and you'll see this in the questionnaire. So we've chosen these 2 models, okay? So various constructs you would have seen in the research aims was perceived usefulness, perceived ease of use, and our behavioral intention, we've used purchase intention or intention to purchase. So these are the 3 main components we've taken. Also, there's often attitudes included in this model as well, and external variables are also included in the later models, because there's TAM 1, there's TAM 2, and there's TAM 3. There's 3 versions that Davis was involved in. and then you'll see there's other elements. But this is the essence, that we've taken these three variables and we've taken 5 of these variables. I think we've taken time, finance, performance, privacy, and I think we took something called social risk, which is in some other later models. So we've taken the bulk of these variables and we've taken these 3 plus other variables from later TAMs. And then these variables we are now using to form our own take of this model based on literature of what other people have done as well. And these are called constructs, or your scales, or the attitudes, but we commonly refer to these as constructs. So we've taken these 2 models, and often people don't combine 2 models, they just take one. So you could take the perceived risk model, and maybe that someone else later defined further and added different variables, and use it as the basis for a different topic, as we are doing here. Because when the perceived risk and TAM model was developed on information systems, the perceived risk model was also developed on something else. I mean, 1972, there wasn't even digital media in the country. I was born, at least. But there was no such thing as cell phones or computers or the internet or anything in South Africa. Gosh, I think computers only sort of came in 85, 86, and then it was like the ZX Spectrum and those type of things. So this model wasn't based on digital media, it was based on something else. But people have now used this model for different topics, and that's where you're making a contribution to research. If you're using older models but test in modern topics. So in this case, it's AI. So we've taken these 2 models, and then here's the conceptual model that we've developed. So we've taken financial risks, so social risk, product risk, security risk, time benefits, except in our questionnaire, you'll see that we phrase these questions positively instead of negatively. If we phrase them negatively in the questionnaire, it would be financial risk, social risk, product risk. But because we phrase them positively, as you'll see, they're then called a benefit. And there is other research that look at it, but it doesn't mean you can't use all the research on risk. You can still use, and if they don't perceive a risk, well, then it's a benefit, the opposite. But anyway, so we've taken these 5 variables. Let's go back. Sorry, I jumped. These 5 variables from the perceived risk model, the perceived usefulness, perceived engagement, and intention to purchase, attitudes, and customer engagement come from TAM. So other models include TAM as an external variable, right? So these variables, these 5 variables come from TAM, and these 5 variables come from the perceived risk. But a lot of people also include intention to purchase in the perceived risk and attitudes in perceived risk models. So they, because so many people have used both of these models millions of times, you'll find various combinations of them. And from this model, you can see that we want to look at the relationship of all of these 5 perceived risk variables and these 3 TAM variables, their influence on intention to purchase, and we want to look at their influence on attitudes towards virtual assistants and chatbots. Okay, so each line is a hypothesis. So if you looked at our hypothesis, if you go back, we say financial benefits, we hypothesize has a positive influence on attitudes. Then we also say financial benefits have a positive influence on intention to purchase. And then we say social benefits have a positive influence on attitude, social benefits have a positive influence on intention to purchase, and so forth. So this, and then also what we're saying is the C hypothesis, we're saying attitudes, if attitudes are positive, they are going to mediate the positive effect of financial benefits on intention to purchase. So we're saying strong positive attitudes will take financial benefits and enhance intention to purchase because their attitudes are positive. So that's called the mediating effect. If I just go out here, it's cut off a piece. It's cut off this little arrow here because I made this figure too big. So let's just make it a bit smaller and move it across. And now let's just make it full screen. Yeah, now we can see at least that. So we're saying attitudes mediate all of these variables' effect on intention of purchase. So if there's positive attitudes, it's making the effect of these variables stronger on intention of purchase. And that's what's called the mediating effect. So it's a statistical form of analysis. Now, some of you use the terms mediating and moderating effect, and I'm 100% sure that you don't have a cooking clue what you are talking about, because it's very advanced statistical analysis. And your conceptual models, those that give, did not reflect it. So it's very, very advanced to do that. So just to then go back to the hypothesis, you can see that we're saying financial benefits, positive on attitudes. Financial benefits, positive influence on purchase intention. Each line, attitudes mediates the positive effect between financial benefits and purchase intention. Then you go to the next. Social benefits have a positive influence on attitudes. Social benefits have a positive influence on intention of purchase. And then again, performance benefits have, okay, and there's no mediation effect that we're looking there. But each of these hypotheses that you list, you can't just list hypotheses in your research. You need to provide substantiation from other studies. So you need to, even if they're not exactly for chatbots and virtual assistants, but they for other platforms, you need to find 5, 10 other studies that looked at the same relationship of either financial benefits or financial risk. It doesn't matter because this is just the opposite. So this is the same as saying financial risk has a negative influence on attitudes. Would be the converse of this if you looked at it from a negative perspective. So you need to find other studies that looked at specifically attitudes and financial benefits. Maybe not, I mean, try and see what you could find on chatbots and virtual assistants or other AI platforms. But if you can't, you could find the same relationship for other digital platforms. And then see, you'll find some had a positive influence, some had a negative influence, some did not find any significance. And you would then need to provide substantiation and then give this hypothesis. Substantiation and then give this hypothesis, and substantiation for this mediating effect, and then give the hypothesis. It's not you just coming up with your diagram and saying, this is what I'm going to prove. Each of these relationships you need to justify through literature. So you don't just make it up. You need to find a lot of studies. You need to summarize a lot of studies that looked at similar variables, maybe not for the exact platform, and provide substantiation. And each study you would need to say where it was conducted, who it was conducted amongst, and what they found. So yeah, each maybe I must just show you. Just thinking what would be. Yes.
Just, just to clarify, so certainly these variables you don't just merely pick out of the air.
Nope.
It comes from literature. It comes from what you have read.
These
And
also
in
these
terms of
two.
what you
Yeah.
are, yeah, and in terms of what you're reading, which is also based in your previous knowledge. Because of the fact that you are at postgrad level, there's a foundational knowledge. And that's also what you draw on to be able to devise these hypotheses, research questions. Am I right?
Yep. I just want to open something.
And the reason why I'm going there is, as I said, to make the connection, students need to draw on existing knowledge also. And obviously, as you read, you build on your existing knowledge because you're not coming from nowhere. So you need to go back into yourself almost, rely on your own knowledge, but then develop it further.
Can you, Dr. Williams, see this
Yep.
research proposal on the screen?
Yep.
So here's the topic that we've discussed, that of you, and here's my master student. A proposal's been approved, the ethics been approved, we've collected the data, and she's, her findings chapter now, I've done the stats for her, so now she just needs to write up. So here's the background to the research information, and I divide it in 4 areas. So it's the background information. I've removed all the subheadings for ethics, the importance, the research gaps from lots of studies showing the different topics and different TAM variables and different perceived risk variables as well. And so look how many sources she has. There's like 50 sources probably for this little one, area. And then we've looked at the mandate for further research, where people said there's a need for further research on these variables, um, either because larger sample sizes, different countries, different target groups, as I showed you, different theoretical models, right? Then comes the problem statement, stating why this is a problem, the rationale, and here's the research objectives and the research questions. But what I wanted to show you is, here's financial risk. Okay, in this stage, we're still looking at it as a risk perspective. And so we flipped this later, but you can see she provided justification for these 3 relationships by many, many studies. And here we are looking at it from a negative point of view. Financial risk negatively affects. Financial risk negatively affects. Attitudes negatively affect. But because of our questionnaire, we've changed it positively. But you can see, so these 3 hypotheses were justified by all these other studies that looked at the same relationship, but different contexts, different countries, different target groups, maybe at different digital platforms. And then you just give in their findings here. And here's social risk. And again, all the substantiation and the hypothesis, performance risk, and, and security risk, and, all the hypothesis, time risk, justification, all the different hypotheses. And so we go down. You can't just make these up. You need to have read. And each one, you can see she's got about 20, 30 studies here. And in customer engagement and all the different hypotheses. And then, she talks about the theoretical frameworks that she's used. And here's the model. At this stage, it was still negative, but we flipped it to positive. Here's the framework. Okay. And then you go to your literature review and whatnot. So what I want to emphasize is these relationships. You have to justify each of them by literature. You can't just take these 2 models, put them together. You need to have read widely to know that you can provide support, that there were other studies that found the same relationship to be positive, and other studies that found it to be negative, and other studies that found no significance. And so it's very important that and then you provide justification, you come up with your hypothesis, and then you plot those hypotheses, or vice versa. From this, you create your hypothesis in a conceptual framework like this, which is based on 2 theoretical frameworks. Now, you need to create a questionnaire that is going to give you the data to answer, to prove all these hypotheses or disprove them. And you're going to also, the questionnaire needs to answer your research questions. So the first research question or objectives related only to the attitudes, but the second question said there's a cross-tabulation between usage variables and intention to purchase, and a cross-tabulation between demographic variables and intention to purchase. Are there differences between these variables? So now you need to, once you've got this framework, once you've got your research questions and objectives and your titles, only once that's firmly in place and you've got a concrete conceptual model, can you develop your, and this is a conceptual model because it's just the figure, but it's a framework when you discuss everything that goes in. You're discussing all of these variables that are included in this model, then it's a framework. So the model is specifically just the diagram, whereas the framework is the model and discussion of it. Okay. So once you've got something like this, then your title should be clear, your objectives will be clear, the theoretical models you use will be clear, and your hypothesis will be clear. But there was not one of you that had anything that was concrete and clear, that I could see that you were connecting everything to come up with this model. And once you've got this model, it should be easy to develop your questionnaire, because each of these you need to try and go to the original sources to find the different constructs and Likert scale items that they used, and then adapt it to form the Likert scales that are needed for your questionnaire to answer this. So you need to try and actually go to the original source. In the past, I used to leave it up to my master students, but now I double check everything, because I found that they were using articles that cited articles which cited articles. So the article they're using has been cited has been reformulated 10 times, and it differs significantly from the original. So it's always to try and go back to the original founders of the theory, so Jacobi and Catlin, or people soon afterwards, and Davies, their models, see what their constructs look like. And then you can combine that with a more recent article, who also looked at it if they were looking at your exact topic, which can help shape your statements in your questionnaire. So let's see how this conceptual model with the research objectives and questions translates into a questionnaire. And this is why I wanted to do this, because if you don't have all this in place, it's impossible to come up with your research instrument. It's just not possible if this is not clear. And I say there wasn't one out of 45 submissions whose conceptual model was clear or I was happy with. They may have had a conceptual model, but to me it was either a cliche or wasn't based on anything concrete or firm, based on everything that came before it. So if I go to the questionnaire now, let's just go back to where I was, questionnaire example 1. Dr. Williams, just to see if you can see this, AI chatbots and virtual assistants marketing communication questionnaire.
Yes, and that's a Word document.
Yeah, Word document. Perfect. So yeah, it's just the usual introduction, and we gave a definition of a chatbot and a virtual assistant because maybe people weren't exactly sure that they were using it, but everyone has used it, whether they know it or not. Even when you go to the CPT library and you log in, a chatbot pops up and says, how can we help you, and when you phone any company these days, you never get to a person, you get to a virtual assistant. So yeah. So the questionnaire, okay, please turn your phone horizontal, blah, blah, blah. So I hereby give my consent, but there is a conformed consent. Have you used chatbots? If they haven't used chatbots, then, if the answer is no, that's where the questionnaire ends. So they need to say yes and yes. Right. So now we're looking at, if we look at our second research objective or question, it wants to look at usage variables of chatbots. So firstly, we want to see, what do they majorly engage in? Chatbots and virtual assistants, just chatbots, or just virtual assistants? Probably the majority would answer both, but some may only look at one or the other, and in the actual research, obviously a majority said both. The next question is, which mediums do you engage with? Tick all that applies, and you've got to be very careful when you say tick all that applies, because the statistics you can get from this is not very strong, because each option means they're either going to tick it or not tick it. And if they ticked it, it's really saying, yes, we use it. If they don't tick it, they're saying, no, we don't use it. So this actually is 10 or 12 yes, no questions. What statistics can we do with this? Very, very little. But when I get to the next question, I'll explain why you had such a question. But it gives you a good graph, so you could generate one graph from this, and that's the worth of it. In other words, which mediums they use. There's no cross tabulation we can do on it, because then we would have to do cross tabulation for 12 different variables which said yes, no, and yes, no does not result. I mean, the answers obviously will be more positive if they said yes than if they said no. If that's not the case, well, then your data is not very good. So we had this question. Then in our title, remember we said we would look at cross sectors. We weren't looking at one. So a lot of students want to look at one sector for the topic. And yes, you can. You could just look at chatbots in retail and online e-commerce. So that's fine. Or you could look at it broadly and you say tick all that applies. Government services, banking, retail, education, entertainment, travel, healthcare, customer support, technical across sectors. And if you collected enough questionnaires, then what we could do is once you've finished with your thesis, we could sort the data for just those that used retail shopping and write a journal article on that. And then we could sort those that just used travel, tick yes for travel. We could sort the data and we could do a journal article on that. So if you want to, and you've collected enough questionnaires, this allows you to do a lot of research outputs afterwards. But if you just focus on one, that's great. You can do one journal article from your research, but it makes it harder for you to collect your data, because if people haven't used a retail online shopping or e-commerce chatbot or virtual assistant, they cannot answer your questionnaire. So the advantage of going across sectors is it allows everyone to complete your questionnaire, because they would have used a chatbot or virtual assistant if they interacted with any of these type of organizations. They could complete it. But if you just narrow your research to one specific industry, it means that you are going to be immediately limiting. A lot of you always want to focus on the fashion industry, or you want to focus on beauty, all those type of things, but you're limiting who can complete your questionnaire. So that's something to consider. Some people say you must focus on an industry, others don't. I always want my students to go broad, because then later we can do lots of publications if they've collected enough data. But anyway, so this is part of the, if you just, your topic could be chatbots and virtual assistants used in retail online shopping. That's fine as well. Then you wouldn't have this question, because in your title you would have this. Then other usage factors: how often do you use it? How many hours? How often do you use it for information? How often do you use it to assist with a purchase? How much do you spend on using digital platforms? All of these variables, questions 4 to 8 and question 1, are what I call usage variables, and is answering, because we're going to cross tabulate these variables with intention to purchase. So, and maybe the attitudes, the two dependent variables. Oh, I didn't explain dependent and independent variables, but I will when I go back to the diagram. So those usage variables are necessary to answer your second objective and your second research question. Then we ask some demographic factors. So what's your gender, male, female, other? Some people have non-binary and other. You can have 10 categories here these days. Generally, I just say male, female, and other, because that would cover a lot. Some people say prefer not to say as well, but I kind of want to force an answer. Your age in years, so we left this open-ended, but this focuses on Gen Y and Z, but we leave it open-ended and we convert it to the cohort afterwards, to Gen Y or Z. Those of you in my class last year know what I'm talking about. Then your education level and what province. So again, in the title, we said we're setting South Africa or Cape Town, but it's good to, you can say in Cape Town or in South Africa. And then you include this as a question, because if there's a lot of people in the Western Cape, but that's not actually where they reside. They reside in other provinces, particularly if you're collecting your data at the university. A lot of people don't come from the Western Cape. So, and if you use snowball sampling, you don't know where the questionnaire is going to go in South Africa. So if you have this province question, your title could change later. Once you collected your data, you can see, oh, we've actually got representation from all the provinces. So instead of Cape Town, we could then have in South Africa. But if you see 99% of your respondents are from the Western Cape, I would then chuck the 1% from the other provinces, not use that, and then just say in the Western Cape or in Cape Town in your title. So, your title changes up until the day you submit it for examination, your thesis, or you could, your title, even the examiners can change your title. So the title can always change, but your data really. So I always have this question because then that helps you with your title. So our third research question objective was, what demographic factors influence intention to purchase? So this is used for the cross-tabulation would answer your question. Then you get to your Likert scale statements. You can either have a 5-point scale or a 7-point scale is better, ranging from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And what I've just showed you in the questionnaire here is that these financial benefit constructs, so you've got all your variables in your conceptual framework here: financial benefits, social benefits, performance, security, time benefits, perceived usefulness, perceived ease of use, customer engagement, attitudes, intention purchase, come from sources. And definitely you shouldn't be having recent sources here. You should be going more to the original models. So financial benefits, these 4 statements were adapted from Hassan and Aturan, these 2 articles. So it's vitally, and so when students are at master's level or whatever, I insist that when the students send me the questionnaire, they send me the articles that they adapted these from so that I can double check. In the past, I left it to their own devices, and then when I actually check the sources they're citing and I check the statements and say, but these statements don't come from the sources that you've cited. The relationship is minimal. So I'm very, very particular that whoever you cite here, and so these articles would have used these statements, but maybe in a different context for social media, website, or even traditional media or something else, but you can then adapt it. But it's best to go as far back as possible to the original authors, but in this case, they didn't do it for these sources. So these 4 statements, when I look at these 2 journal articles, I should see that these 4 statements appeared in some or other format in their constructs. It's just that you have to adapt it. And the importance of taking these from other journal articles, you can't just make these up. Because if you do, there's going to be no validity. And if there's no validity, you can chuck your data away. And I've had students that have collected 1,000 questionnaires, and we ran the validity test, and there was none. We chucked those 1,000 questionnaires away. It's worthless. So the statements need to come from reputable sources and take great care in developing them, because if they're not developed correctly, you could be finished your data collection and there's no validity. You throw your data away. There's nothing you can do with it. Validity means that it's measured what it intended to measure. And so obviously, if it's not valid, it means you haven't measured what you intended to measure. Whereas reliability is another test we do. It means that if you repeat this over and over, it would give you similar results. But validity is even more important, that you've measured what you intend to measure, and you wanted to measure financial benefits in relation to chatbots and virtual assistants. So even if the original source was, I'm satisfied with my money's worth for something else, you have now adjusted it to your topic, but you've kept the essence, which is probably, that is the essence of that statement. So this could have been ordering a product full stop, but you've added via organizations, chatbots, and virtual assistants to tie it into your study. So you've got 4 statements for each. So these 4 came from these 2 studies. These 4 came from those. Basically similar studies, similar. And then the perceived usefulness came from Davis Tam 2. So these were directly translated from their original research on information systems. and these also came from another Davis and then custom engagement. They took from an article that a student and I wrote, because there wasn't actually very good attitude scales. And attitudes that went back to like a very old article, Taylor and Todd, to get the attitude scales. And an intention to purchase, I actually wrote an article that has been cited like over 700 times. And the intention to purchase scale I developed there is actually got 9 items. So a lot of people are using it to get 4 statements from. So these need to be developed from other studies, but preferably going back older. You can see none of these besides this Duffin and Hawley, because in our research this was highly valid, so it's good to use for other research. But the rest is pretty much older sources. And in answering these questions, and then, then what I do is I just want to show you this. Then we do factor analysis to see if these 4 variables actually are related to each other and actually measure financial benefits. And we need to see that these 4 statements actually measure social benefits and are stick together. So I just want to show you, and that's validity, and then we can actually merge them and form the construct to prove our hypothesis. But it's very important that you develop these statements from reputable, good quality journals and preferably older sources. And so if I just go here is an example of excellent validity of this study. Dr. Williams, I'm just scrolling down now. I'm not going to look at this. I just want to go to the pattern matrix. Can you see an Excel spreadsheet and it says pattern matrix on?
Financial benefits, indeed.
You can. Thank you very much. So here I did for her research, but this was smaller studies. I did factor analysis after they collected the data and it was captured. And here you can see financial benefits are all together, and each of these variables need to be above 0.5. They're called factor loadings, which is convergent reliability. There's validity. We do other tests as well. And so you can see these 4 are excellent. You guaranteed that these are matching the financial benefits because they're all together. And then we look at social benefits. They're all together and all above 7. And then we look at performance benefits. They're all together. They're all together and all above. This is above 0.6. The time benefits are all together. The perceived usefulness are all together, all above 7. The perceived ease of use is all above 7. There's 2 that are 0.5, but they're still acceptable. If they're below 0.5, they're not. And we look at perceived ease, custom engagement are all together. And we look at attitudes are altogether above 7, and we look at intention to purchase. So this is perfect, excellent validity. This is what your data should look like. However, if don't save, if we look at this example, this is actually not a bad example, but it's just to illustrate. I've got far worse examples. If you look at this example, just to check Dr. Williams, you can see a new pattern matrix on the screen, and the top value is 786.
Indeed.
Thank you. So here the financial benefits are together, but you can see the third variable is 0.4. So that's problematic. We may well end up deleting that, and you can do that. So I suggest when you develop constructs that you have 3 statements, but preferably 4 to 5 statements for each construct. 4 is ideal, because then in this circumstance, this wasn't good, and you may end up deleting this to increase the validity. Here we've got 4. These were all good. Here we've got 4, all above 7. Here we've got 4. Security benefits are all good. Now things start to, here we've got 4, but we've got another variable linking to this. And then, so this variable could be problematic because it's linking with perceived usefulness. They're high, but perceived usefulness is linking with perceived ease of use as well. And it's linking to some other variable here. And then in customer engagement is okay. But attitudes is also linking all in this last column. And all of this are linking, there's many columns linking here. So this is a mess. The first half was good. The second half, there's big validity problems with this data. And I can tell you that these students use the same questionnaire, the exact same questionnaire. What's the difference? The one collected their data properly. The other bunch of students, I am obviously suspecting, got up to some mischief. And as I always tell my students, that the stats shout what you did. And so, and I show them this at the beginning of the year. And this year, those in my class, 10 of their validities were great. And there were 2 lots of validities that were one like this and another also like this. And then you look at their other data and you can see there's things they did that they shouldn't have done. Like completing the questionnaires themselves, and then the validity tells you this. So also how you collect the data is very important. So this is pretty much of a mess, and if this was my student, you can't rescue this. They'd have to collect their data again, so but, and we won't save this, if this questionnaire is not properly done, you have no chance of getting valid data. So you can see that these 10 constructs are here. And if you go back to the PowerPoint, Dr. Williams, just to check if you can see the conceptual model again.
Yes, Prof.
Thank you. So now, if you've collected your data and you've done that validity check, and when you do that fact analysis, you save the variables. So each of those 4 variables that were together would be saved as a new variable. And so now you have each of these 10 constructs as one variable, and now we can use statistical measures to test. We just use regression or structural equation and modeling, which is based on regression. We can now test if financial benefits has a positive influence, if social benefits has a positive influence, if product has social benefits. And let me just jump to, seeing I've just done the student stats, let's just jump to you and show you actually what this chapter looks like. So you can see the end picture, statistics, chapter 5, and I think I'm just going to obviously give a million comments and things like that. So let me just go to review. Let's just accept all changes, and let's just delete all the comments. Delete all comments. Right. So this is what your actual chapter would look like based on that questionnaire. So each of the questions in your questionnaire, chatbots and virtual assistants, you do a graph. So this was the findings. My students I had last year, then these where you looked at the different ways you accessed it, you have a graph, basically yes, no. As I said, you have the sector interaction, so each of the sectors, who used what sectors. You have the usage, the usage hours, the information incidents, the purchase intention, the digital spending, the demographics, the gender, it was pretty evenly spread, the cohort, the education. You can see the provinces was mainly the Western Cape, but 30% was from other provinces, and seeing the samples 1,280, it's big enough. So we can now safely say in South Africa, because 2% of that amount is like almost 30 respondents, which is fine. And then the attitudes, so you can see all the attitudes were above 4 because of 7-point scale, so they're positive, with the exceptions of social benefits. So social benefits is actually negative. And then you do a scale for the 4 statements. So financial benefit, social benefit, you convert to 1. Again, those who did my class last year will know exactly what this is about because they did it as part of their project. So the 10 graphs, and then you do factor analysis. So you have the 10 variables, the eigenvalues, but never mind about that. Here's the spot, and you see between 10 and 11 there's a slight kink. That means the 10 variables are valid. And then here's the factor pattern matrix. You can see that there was good validity. All the variables stuck together. We highlight that by colors. Then you do a graph to show the different means and standard deviations, but the factor loadings are these same variables, and they measure convergent validity. AVE, average variance extracted, also measures convergent validity, and they need to be above 0.5 as well, and all of them were. Composite reliability and Kronberg alpha need to be above 0.7. That measures reliability. They all were. Then here's a measure of discriminant validity, where you take the square root of AVE should be greater than the correlation between the variables, which also comes from the factor analysis, and they are. And then we do something called heteromonorate ratio, and all these factors should be below 0.9, which also means discriminant validity. If these two are out, you can chuck your data away. They need to be, that's why you need to develop your questionnaire. Then we did structural equation modeling, so there's other stats, and here's the final figure, what we actually found. So we found that financial benefits did not have a significant positive influence on intention to purchase or on attitude. We found that social benefits did have a positive influence on intention to purchase, and it had a negative influence on attitudes, but it wasn't significant. So here, you can see those that had positive and those that didn't, and those that were negative. So you actually put the beta values in here. Then you test your hypothesis. So each hypothesis you statistically prove, which you justified. And then at the end of this, you can state there was no support for these hypotheses. There was for this one. There was for these. There weren't too many at the beginning. And then all the ones at the end, there were support. And then you do your cross tabulation to answer your 2 other questions. So here we compared demographic factors, and these are the usage factors. And demographic, we cross-tabulated it with attitudes and intention to purchase to see where there were significant differences. And there was here for usage hours, purchase incidents, information incidents, digital spending, and cohort. There were significant differences. For example, the cohort, we found that Gen Y were more positive attitudes towards chatbots and virtual assistants, and they also had more positive attitude in terms of intention to purchase based on chatbots. And then that's how it finishes. So all of that translates into that finding. And then this, you can now use your, just add literature with the findings in your discussion section, and then your conclusion section, and then you're done. So let's don't save that. So now you've kind of got the full picture, all of this. And if we go back, we can close this questionnaire now. Don't save. And go back to the original research objectives. Dr. Williams, just to check that you can see this conceptual model again.
Absolutely.
Okay, so now, sorry, I just want to go back, and you can see the research objectives now.
Aims and objectives.
Aims and objectives, perfect. So your original objective is to test the attitudinal influences. So you would do that via all of your hypotheses. Your first secondary was to examine influence on purchase intention, to establish usage factors. So you did cross-tabulation to explore. Demographic factors have an influence. You did cross-tabulation. And we didn't just do it on intention and purchase, we did it on attitudes as well. So that questionnaire allowed us to answer all of these questions and allowed us to answer the hypothesis through testing those relationships. So you can see how they all link. And then just to show you, here's another example, the effect of Instagram influences on intention to purchase among Gen Z in Cape Town. So again, it's to explore Instagram influences on intention to purchase, the usage factors on intention to purchase, and the demographic factors on intention to purchase. Here are the hypothesis. So attractiveness has a positive influence on intention to purchase, credibility has a positive influence on intention to purchase, etc., etc. Here's the model we used. We used TAM, and then we use the source credibility model. This is the original source credibility from Ohanian and Hoofland. And this is what the conceptual model looked like. Let's just make this a little bit smaller. Here we go. So we took these 4 variables. We took attractiveness, expertise, and trust, and often it's called the source credibility model. So credibility is often included variables. So these come from the source credibility model. These 3 variables come from TAM. So we had to find literature of other studies that looked at these 4 variables on intention to purchase, on purchase intention, and perceived ease of use. And then to translate this to a questionnaire, if I just go back to this conceptual workshop and we go to questionnaire 2. Okay, this is just a general. I should actually convert social media influencers to Instagram influencers, but this was what some of you in this class, actually I think was this class, I'm not quite sure, but let's just go editing, find, and quickly replace this with Insta, just so we're accurate, Instagram influencer, replace all, yes, okay. So that's a bit better. Instagram influencers, just to get it in line. So again, do you have a social media account? Do you? Well, this should again be Instagram. Yes, yes. Then we had questions. Which social media platforms use? Because we made it broad for when I used it for my advanced diploma students. Which social media platform? In this case, we actually just focus on Instagram. But you could, the questionnaire could just be on social media influencers, and then you could divide it year after it. So you could go broad. Then how long, what's the average time, what categories do you use, what reason do you use influencers for, how often do you engage, the demographic factors like the others, and then here's the constructs. So trust, credibility, expertise, some of these are 3 statements: attractiveness, perceived usefulness, perceived ease of use, and intention to purchase with the sources. So if you complete this questionnaire and it's reliable, then you would be able to get the answers for this conceptual model and answer your research questions and objectives. And then likewise, there's another example. So here's AI, intelligence and human social influences, the moderating effect of Gen Z on purchase intention. Here are the research objectives. We have the hypothesis. So expertise have a positive effect on trustworthiness. Expertise have a positive impact on purchase intention. So again, they used the source credibility model. They used the advertising value model this time. So entertainment, informativeness, irritate, advertising value, attitudes. And then here's their model. This is a doctoral study, so it's a bit more complicated. So here are the different source credibility and advertising value variables. Actually are these 7 variables, and then they feed into intention to purchase. And here we're looking at the moderating effect, which some of you used in the study not really understanding. So we're looking which has a greater influences, AI influences or human influences on these specific relations. So not on the variable, but on the actual regression line, the relationship. And if I just show you this, I'm going to skip through the others and then go to example 6. Here's the questionnaire 3. Artificial intelligence and human influences. And so what do you use, what you prefer? So we want to, because we're doing the moderated effect, you want them to tick one or the other, AI or human influences, because then we can compare the difference. If you allow them to tick both, It's not possible. So they have to use some quota sampling because we assume more people use human influencers than AI influencers. So we have to, once you've reached a quota here, then we'll just target people to use AI influencers. So what platforms do you use? What categories? What types of AI influencers? How often? How many hours? How often do you use for information, purchase?
Duffet,
Yes?
Prof. Duffet, just a question. If you go, where is that now? Where you started out, I saw there was an instruction right there. Question 1. Please answer the rest of the questions based on your answer here. So
Yes.
from that, I assume that if the person said human influences, that every other question would be in that context.
Correct. So that's
So
why
I'm
for
asking
every
about the next question.
every question says, do you follow AI or human? So in other words, if
So
you
what I'm
click
saying
human
is,
here is, then you would be answering it for human.
so what I'm saying is, and maybe I'm just, but I'll chat to you offline about that again. It's fine. Go
Yes.
continue.
Yeah. So
Mm.
okay, maybe it sounds a bit, but so if please answer the
Yeah, yeah.
based on your answers. So we just saying which do
No,
you
no, don't.
use? Yeah,
Yeah, don't worry. I'll chat to
AI
you
human.
offline.
Okay. So anyway, so here's the usage, here's the demographic factors, which province, and then you can see now these were developed from the original source. So this is the best way. Ohanian is, we took trustworthiness, expertise, and attractiveness from the very original creator of the model, and that's the best way because they also just had something is reliable, trustworthy. So we developed this from the original source, which means that we should get very valid results. Um, and that's what I'm more pushing my students to go back to the founders of these theoretical frameworks to develop their questions from, instead of using people that have also adapted it. And now you're adapting what has been adapted, which dilutes your findings. So those three, and then the original model, DAFCO, to develop this advertising model, we've taken informative, entertainment, lack, and advertising value, and purchase intention always comes from the article that I wrote because I did quite a good scale there. And so when this questionnaire is finished, again, it would provide all the necessary information you need to prove these hypotheses and answer your research questions. And then there's a fourth example on WhatsApp brand communication and the objectives, the hypothesis. And here you can see they've taken it from the social presence theory. And here is one that included a number of the factors that he included, but he didn't take it from one specific model. And then here's his theory: human voice and corporate voice influence on perceived appropriate social presence, trust, and purchase intentions. It doesn't have to be a very complicated model per se. At Masters, this 6 variables is enough, especially based on the topic. Another example, the influence of advertising on Instagram and purchase intention. So this took it from TAM and the advertising value model. And then this is what their model looked like. And the students graduated already, summa cum laude. And then, what I don't have, which I just want to plug in, my other flash stick, I haven't updated this yet, is I added a qualitative model later because some of you may do, and that's a bit trickier. So let's just close this and click save and open it on this one quickly. Research workshops, conceptual framework, conceptual model. Oh, to actually open the PowerPoint. So I added an extra one later. Um, Here we go, qualitative. So I had a student with the title Social Media as a Marketing Communication Strategy amongst Health-Related Non-Profit Organizations in the Western Cape, South Africa. And here were the objectives: to identify human MPOs, well, whether they use it, to assess which platforms they use, to determine the strategies, the challenges, the challenges and the benefits. Okay, they based it on TAM. Now it's very hard because you're doing exploratory research in qualitative. So you can say you're doing TAM, but it's hard then, to actually develop a framework, so you've got to make sure your interview guide is on pack. So this was their conceptual model. But this they only really put together after they had their findings, that they found the external influences were positive and negative, the positive perceived ease, usefulness, and negative influences, the perceived ease of use, positive and negative influence, the behavioral intentions, positive and negative, and the actual use. But this only represents a small portion of their findings, but they were able to populate this conceptual model only after they had the findings, where based on their research, their interview guide, and let me just show you the interview guide quickly, what it looks like for, here we go, the interview questions, interview guide. So they divided it into themes. Firstly, they start with some general questions about social media, then the strategy. So these all form themes. Then they ask them measurement assessment type questions. How do they measure social media? Their budget, their content guidelines, and best practice. And then at this time of the research, it was just sort of post-COVID. And then they asked them some branding questions. And each of these would form a theme which would help answer your research questions. But from the answers to these questions, they were also able to that's the right one. They were also able to, it's not the right one. Just go back in here. They were also able to develop this from a qualitative perspective, which is quite rare. And so you need to also consider, just because you're doing qualitative research doesn't mean your research is not based on a theoretical framework, and that you won't actually have a conceptual model. You will have a conceptual model. It's just harder to visualize what it's going to look like from the onset, because it's exploratory finding. You don't know what you're going to actually find, but I just wanted to show that it is possible. Quantitative research is much easier because your findings are black and white, whereas qualitative is exploratory. So if one person mentions something, it's important. So it's easy to collect the data. Your problems arise when you have to analyze the data. But both are acceptable. I mean, my master's was qualitative, my doctorate was quantitative. So, you need to choose the methodology that suits, obviously, your research topic, which a lot of you, try to do, but because your framework and theoretical models weren't unpacked, everything else was mixed up. So that's really my story, is just to show you the importance of how everything links together. But the main thing is, like, I've had some students apply for doctorate now, and they haven't done anything else other than their conceptual framework and title, and I'm willing to accept them because I can see from their conceptual framework, I can see the final questionnaire, I can visualize the study. But if I can't visualize the study because it's all mixed up, well then, that's a problem. And if you got the conceptual framework right, you can develop your instrument, and your instrument's going to answer your research questions and your research objectives and your hypothesis, and then that's fine. You can get the findings for your study. So it's kind of, I don't know if I've made sense, but hopefully I have, and hopefully you can refine your research so that for those of you who do apply for masters, I mean, you're going to submit basically what you're doing in this subject. This is what you submit in. Um, and as I say, if I see everything's all mixed up after you've received input, and this what really irritates me, I spend a lot of time giving input in your work at this year to help you, and people submit the exact same work without making any of my changes. There's 0% chance that I will accept you then, because that means I've spent all this time on your 2 assignments, giving extensive feedback, and you've just simply chose to ignore it. Then for me, other people may accept you, other supervisors can choose to accept you, but for me, there's no chance. So the feedback that we give you, Dr. Williams and myself, in this subject, you obviously don't need to stick to the same topic, but you need to stick to the principles that we have given you. I mean, some of you may decide to change your topic completely, but then you need to stick to these principles that you've learned and make sure that you apply it so that we can see the connection between your title, that your research questions and objectives are correct, and your problem statement and your background to the research substantiates sufficient recent gaps. You've chosen an appropriate theoretical framework which you've translated into a conceptual framework and then into a research instrument. If we can see all those connections, and it's a topic, a recent topic that hasn't been done 5,000 times before, then we'll accept you. But if you can't connect all those dots after all the feedback that we've given you, well then, I don't know, if you will ever connect the dots, because we've given you extensive feedback, and if you just choose to ignore it, well then there's nothing we can do. So that's why I thought it was vital to have this last session with you, so that you can all work like beavers and get your research into shipshape and design good research instruments, and then you've got something to form the basis for your master's applications if you're interested in going down that route. Dr. Williams, that's all from me. It took much longer than I thought, but I thought I would just go through it slowly and try and make my points deliberately so that hopefully this will be able to help the students with their research.
Professor Duffett, all I can say is thank you very much. And as you've illustrated, it's not that as researchers we reinvent the wheel. There's a recipe. And you've illustrated that with the examples. Although your study may be in a different context, under different circumstances, but there is a recipe. And certainly at this level, it's going to require work. It's not just an assignment. It's not an essay that is written. But at the same time, you've shown that if you put in the hard work and you think and you read, that it is all possible. So, Professor Duffett, thank you very much. It was certainly extremely informative. And I know that our students will benefit from you coming into our space and sharing your expertise. And certainly I'm looking forward to what they're going to produce. And hopefully we'll have a master's student or 2 or 3 or 4 next year from this batch of PGW students. So Professor Duffett, thank you so much. Have a beautiful evening and we will chat again.
Great.
Bye-bye, everyone. And I shall close the session on that note.
Yeah, if they have any questions, they can shout. I'm willing to wait a few minutes.
Okay.